In the mid-14th century, a silent killer swept across continents, leaving mountains of corpses and cities drowned in fear. No one knew where it came from. No one knew how to stop its hand within just a few years. It erased 1/3 of Europe's population. The Black Death wasn't just a plague. It was a force that shattered economies, toppled social systems, and rewrote the destiny of an entire continent. This is the story of the pandemic that reshaped Europe forever. Origins in Asia, the Black Death began far from Europe. In the vast steppes of Central Asia during the early 14th century, historians believe it emerged among rodent populations, particularly marmots, which carried fleas infected with Yersinia pestis. These fleas transferred the deadly bacteria to humans through bites. The disease traveled along the ancient Silk Road, carried by traders, soldiers, and caravans. Mongol expansion and growing trade networks allowed it to move quickly across continents. By the time it reached the shores of the Black Sea, the plague was already a silent killer waiting to explode into a full-scale pandemic. Arrival in Europe, 1347. The plague entered Europe in 1347, arriving at the bustling Sicilian port of Messina aboard Genoese merchant ships. Many sailors were already dead, and the living were gravely ill. Local authorities tried to drive the ships away, but it was too late. The disease had landed. Within weeks, the plague spread across Sicily and into mainland Italy. From there, it moved along trade routes, striking France, Spain, and England within months. The rapid pace of its arrival shocked communities, leaving little time for preparation or understanding. Europe was about to face one of its darkest chapters. The three forms of plague, the Black Death, manifested in three terrifying forms: bubonic, pneumonic, and septicemic. The bubonic form was most common, marked by swollen lymph nodes, called buboes, in the groin, neck, or armpits. Pneumonic plague attacked the lungs, spreading quickly through coughs and sneezes, and could kill within days. Septicemic plague entered the bloodstream, causing internal bleeding and death within hours. Each form was devastating, but pneumonic and septicemic strains were especially deadly due to rapid onset and high fatality rates. Together, these variants created an unstoppable wave of death across the continent. Transmission methods: the plague spread was driven largely by fleas carried on black rats, which thrived aboard ships, in markets, and inside homes. When infected rats died, their fleas sought new hosts, often humans. In the pneumonic form, the disease spread directly from person to person through airborne droplets, bypassing the need for fleas or rats. Crowded cities, poor sanitation, and constant trade allowed the disease to leap quickly between regions. People had no understanding of bacteria or viruses, so they couldn't stop the invisible killer. By the time they noticed the signs, the plague was already ahead of them. Spread across Europe from its Sicilian foothold, the Black Death surged through Italy, France, and Spain by 1348. It crossed the English Channel, devastating England, Wales, and Ireland. By 1349, it swept into Germany and Scandinavia, reaching Russia by 1351. Its progress followed merchant routes, rivers, and roads, often devastating cities in a matter of weeks. The disease's speed was unprecedented. Many towns lost most of their population within months. Isolation efforts rarely worked, as people fleeing infected areas unknowingly carried the plague with them. No part of Europe was truly safe, and the pandemic's reach was nearly total. Death toll estimates the Black Death killed between 25 and 50 million people, about 1/3 of Europe's population. Some regions lost over half their inhabitants. Entire villages vanished, their fields left untended, and homes abandoned. Death came so swiftly that bodies often lay unburied for days, overwhelming burial grounds. In cities, the smell of decay was constant, and mass graves became common. The mortality rate varied, depending on the plague's form, but in many cases, survival was rare. The demographic collapse would take more than a century to recover from, leaving deep social and economic scars. Symptoms and suffering. Victims of the bubonic plague developed painful swellings, or buboes, often the size of an egg. These were accompanied by fever, chills, fatigue, and vomiting. In severe cases, the skin turned black from subdermal bleeding, giving the disease its name. Pneumonic plague victims coughed blood and struggled to breathe, while septicemic sufferers experienced sudden bleeding and rapid organ failure. Death could occur within a few days or even hours of infection. The speed and horror of these symptoms created a climate of panic as people watched loved ones die in agony without any hope of cure. Medical knowledge and treatments, medieval medicine, had no real answer for the plague. Physicians, known as plague doctors, wore long robes, gloves, and bird-like masks filled with aromatic herbs, believing these scents could filter out disease. Treatments included bloodletting, applying poultices, or bathing in vinegar, none of which worked. Astrology and superstition often guided medical advice. Some doctors blamed miasma, or bad air, and urged people to burn incense or avoid bathing. Others recommended bizarre diets or charms. These ineffective methods highlighted how little was known about disease, and why the plague spread unchecked despite desperate attempts to stop it. Religious interpretations: many believed the plague was divine punishment for humanity's sins. In a deeply religious society, the pandemic was seen as God's wrath. Public prayers, processions, and acts of repentance became common. One extreme movement, the flagellants, traveled from town to town, whipping themselves to atone for mankind's sins. Some church leaders claimed the plague signaled the coming apocalypse. While religious devotion intensified for some, others lost faith entirely, questioning why a just God would allow such suffering. The crisis reshaped Europe's spiritual landscape, planting seeds of doubt and change that would influence future religious reform. Persecution and scapegoating, fear and ignorance led to widespread persecution during the Black Death. Jewish communities, in particular, were accused of poisoning wells or spreading the plague deliberately. These false accusations sparked massacres across Europe, with thousands killed or forced to flee. Foreigners, beggars, and lepers were also targeted as people sought someone to blame. In reality, the disease spared no group, striking rich and poor alike. Such scapegoating deepened social divisions and left a legacy of mistrust. The violence of these persecutions became one of the pandemic's darkest side effects, adding human cruelty to an already tragic disaster. Impact on feudalism. The death toll drastically reduced Europe's workforce. Fields went unplowed, harvests failed, and entire estates were left abandoned. Surviving peasants suddenly found themselves in high demand, and they demanded better wages and working conditions. Landlords desperate for labor had little choice but to comply. This shift weakened the rigid feudal system where peasants had long been tied to the land. Peasant revolts erupted in several countries, fueled by a new sense of bargaining power. Over time, the plague accelerated the decline of feudalism, laying the groundwork for more modern economic and social structures. Economic consequences: trade networks collapsed as merchants died or refused to travel. Cities faced shortages of goods, driving prices up in some areas, while others experienced deflation due to lack of demand. Many businesses shut down permanently. Agricultural production plummeted, causing food shortages in some regions. Paradoxically, survivors sometimes benefited economically, inheriting property and enjoying higher wages. However, overall, the economy took decades to stabilize. The plague disrupted every level of commerce, from local markets to international trade, reshaping Europe's economic balance. The scars of this economic collapse would influence policies and markets for generations. Urban versus rural effects: cities suffered the most during the Black Death due to overcrowding, poor sanitation, and constant movement of people. Narrow streets and shared wells made disease transmission easy. Mortality rates in urban areas were often catastrophic, with some losing more than half their population. Rural areas were not spared, but lower population density slowed the spread somewhat. Still, villages often faced complete abandonment when too many farmers died to maintain the land. The uneven impact of the plague changed migration patterns, with some survivors moving from the countryside to repopulate partially emptied cities. Changes in religion and culture. The plague left deep marks on European culture. Religious art began to focus heavily on death, the afterlife, and the fragility of life, seen in motifs like the Danse Macabre, Dance of Death. Skepticism toward the church grew as prayers and rituals failed to stop the disease. This loss of trust in religious authority helped pave the way for the Renaissance and Reformation. Literature and music also reflected the trauma, with themes of mortality and despair becoming common. The pandemic reshaped Europe's cultural identity, encouraging both morbid reflection and a renewed interest in human achievement. Long-term demographic impact: Europe's population took more than a century to recover to pre-plague levels. Entire generations were lost, and family lines disappeared. Labor shortages persisted for decades, permanently altering the balance between workers and landowners. This demographic shift encouraged urban growth as people moved to cities seeking opportunity. Lower population also meant less pressure on resources, allowing some regions to rebound economically faster. Yet the long shadow of the Black Death influenced social structures, politics, and economics for generations, reminding survivors and descendants of how fragile civilization could be in the face of nature's power. Recurring outbreaks: the Black Death was not a one-time event. Plague outbreaks recurred every few decades for centuries, though none matched the scale of the first wave. Cities like London, Paris, and Venice experienced multiple smaller epidemics into the 17th century. These recurring waves reinforced public fear and influenced urban planning, trade policies, and even art. Communities developed quarantine systems, closing ports and isolating the sick to prevent spread. Though medical understanding was still limited, repeated exposure to the disease forced governments and citizens to adopt more organized responses to future outbreaks. Modern understanding today: scientists know that Yersinia pestis bacteria, spread mainly by flea bites, caused the Black Death. DNA evidence from medieval graves has confirmed this. Researchers also study how climate change, trade, and human behavior contributed to the pandemic's spread. Advances in genetics show that the plague may have altered the human genome, making some people more resistant to certain diseases. Modern medicine can treat plague with antibiotics if caught early, but its history remains a powerful warning. Understanding the Black Death helps modern society prepare for and respond to new pandemics. Lessons learned: the Black Death taught Europe hard lessons about disease control and public health. Quarantine, which began in Venice by isolating ships for 40 days, became a lasting practice. Communities learned the importance of sanitation, waste management, and reducing overcrowding. The pandemic also showed how misinformation, scapegoating, and fear can worsen a crisis. Economically and socially, it proved that catastrophic events can reshape entire systems. The Black Death's legacy is not only one of death, but of transformation, pushing Europe toward modernization in health, economy, and thought, forever changing the course of its history.